So our big topic today is Bitcoin. You call this a cryptocurrency. Can you?
Well, it's really, really clever. You know, the reason that I sort of fell in love with this for the moment is as I plowed in, I just got a big kick out of the way that the many problems associated with a sort of a floating currency, meaning a currency that isn't anchored by any central bank. There's no state sponsorship for it. It's a real thing. Anyone who's interested, and I would encourage our listeners, if this podcast and what they hear about it makes them curious, go check it out. You just put Bitcoin into Google and you'll start seeing pages of stuff. About 2 years ago, the project was registered a little over 2 years ago by a Japanese cryptographer, Satoshi Nakamoto. And it's an open source project on SourceForge, so none of this is, black art stuff. The goal is to really to offer it an honest to God, non-hobby level, but industrial strength, internet-based, peer-to-peer currency where real value can be exchanged between two parties without any intermediary being involved. And that's one of the trickiest things because you've got all kinds of problems. First of all, where does the currency come from? What creates the currency? How much currency is flowing through the system? How do you monitor that and regulate it? How do you prevent it from being inflated? How do you keep people from fraudulently creating currency? How do you keep someone from, if they have some, from reusing the same currency? All of that has been solved with this system in some very clever and very new ways, which is really what captivated my attention on this. So
wait a minute. So we have currencies. We have euros and yens and dollars. How can you invent a currency? What makes that work?
Well, okay. So think about it. A currency is nothing really but an agreement among the parties that this synthetic thing has value. Once upon a time, when the dollar was anchored to a gold standard, the idea was that there was gold backing up dollars, and so when you had a so-called promissory note, it was equivalent to X amount of gold. And we were, of course, famously taken off of the gold standard. The problem was we needed more money than we had gold, so we had to disconnect in the case of U.S. dollars, we had to disconnect U.S. dollars from gold because we literally needed to create more money than we had gold to back it up.
It's kind of an incredible innovation in human society when you think about it, that this works at all. Because because it started out you were carrying around your chickens because you just wanted to trade what you had of value for what the blacksmith had. That got inconvenient, so gold became a good standard because everybody valued gold and everybody kind of had the same value of gold. But we've gone from that to this sort of agreement that, well, I'm gonna agree that $1's worth of work is worth $1's worth of merchandise, and it doesn't have to be backed by anything. We'll all agree that that's the way to pay stuff. So I guess that's all they have to do is get enough people to agree that this currency is valuable?
Correct. Well, and notice also that we chose gold because it was scarce. We didn't use water, for example.
Right.
Because you just go over to a stream and dip your bucket in, and now, and the problem is, of course, anybody could go do that. So
there's a famous scene in one of the Douglas Adams novels where they decide leaves will be their currency. And it has the same problem.
Well, of course, money grows on trees,
right?
So
exactly.
Yeah. And so we chose gold because it was scarce, And famously in the days of individual gold miners, they'd go out and try to find it because they were creating more currency to put into the system at a controlled rate. And initially, when there was lots of gold around, we were digging it up and turning it into bars and coins and so forth. And over time, it became increasingly difficult for us to find more gold. So it became increasingly scarce, and its value has increased. So
and in some ways, a virtual we have a virtual currency with the dollar and the euro and all of these, and in some ways, that is a little more fair because someone can't just go out and find a bunch of money, well, unless they're robbing a bank, I guess. But you can't just go digging in the hills and luck into a bunch of money. It has to be earned in some manner.
Right. So what has been created with Bitcoin has all of these attributes. There is this concept of Bitcoins, the currency in the same way that the abbreviation for US dollars is USD and euros is EUR. Bitcoin's abbreviation is BTC, Bitcoin, BTC. And this network of computers exists now on the internet, peer-to-peer. You can go to bitcoin.org and download a program for Windows, Mac, and Linux, which is open source, and install it on your computer and tell it to start generating Bitcoins. That is, literally start making money.
So you are making money out of nothing.
Well,
just by being a member. I mean, how does this sounds like some sort of BitTorrent situation?
I know, it sounds wacky, but
yeah.
So you are making money. The way you make money is by processing transactions within the Bitcoin system. So, and this is complicated, but unfortunately it needs to be complicated in order to be robustly secure, which it really is. There is in the FAQ at bitcoin.org in the FAQ there's a link to the original PDF that Satoshi wrote that describes in greater detail how this works. But the idea is that you want a transaction trail of every single transaction between two parties that has ever occurred. And they're occurring all the time. Now, this is not just, this currency is virtual, but it has been anchored now to real currencies. There are websites that will trade real currencies for Bitcoins. They at this point in time, about 2 years after it was launched, the current currency trade of US dollars for Bitcoins is about 1-to-1. I think it's like 93 cents for a Bitcoin. And there are organizations which accept Bitcoin payments. The EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, accepts donations in Bitcoin currency. There are programmers who will work and accept payment in Bitcoins. There's a I think it's called a trade link at bitcoin.org that shows a page of lists of all the currency exchanges that exist now, and then a growing number of organizations and companies that will accept Bitcoin currency as real. So I know this still sounds all
okay. Let's back up a little bit here. If I can just create by running the program money, aren't we running into the leaves and water problem where we just get runaway inflation and the currency is valueless?
So yes, except that it's all controlled. It is the way it functions is that new coins, new Bitcoins are generated on the network when a node, and for example, if you're running the program, you are one node. When a node finds the solution to a hard problem. Now, this is really very clever the way this works, because it prevents people from being able to create currency at will. Back in 97, I think it was 1997, someone named Adam Back came up with a concept for anti-spam, which he called proof of work. The idea was that spammers function because they're able to just spew out email at virtually zero cost. It doesn't cost them anything to send out email. So as a consequence, we're all being deluged with email, which it's expensive for us to receive, not expensive for them to send. So Adam said, what if we come up with a way of making it expensive for someone to send email? And the way we do that is we create a computational burden, which we don't have the technology to short circuit, where they have to do a substantial amount of work in order to sort of validate an email. And on this show, we've talked about hashing a lot. Hashing, of course, is a valuable technique that takes an arbitrary length input and hashes it down into a so-called a digest of a fixed length. So imagine, like, take SHA 256, which is the secure hashing algorithm, which produces a 256-bit result. Imagine if, in order to qualify for sending email, you have to hash the email header such that some number of the first bits out of the 256 bits are all zero. So if you just hash an email header at random, the most significant bit has a 50% chance of being a 1 or a 0. So you increment a sort of a fudge factor and then hash it again, and until you get that first bit that's a 0. But say that say that to qualify, the header has to have a hash where the first 20 bits, for example, are all 0. Well, it's going to take 2 to the 20 operations to guarantee that. So an average, half that number of hashes have to be tried. So the idea is this forces someone to do a huge amount of work trying to fudging the header in order to get all, like, the first X number of bits of the hash to be 0. So in practice, you could set the difficulty so that it might take somebody 2 seconds to do the work on a 1 gigahertz PC. But that would mean that it takes a spammer 2 seconds per email, which is vastly more computation time than it takes them now.
And so on an individual basis, you don't notice that much.
Exactly.
But if you are trying to send, vast amounts of email, which I guess could negatively impact legitimate bulk email like newsletters and things like that too.
And actually, that's exactly why the idea did not take off, was that it was still, while yes, it would be burdensome for spammers, exactly as you said, there are legitimate mass mailers, and if we did anything to allow them through, then the spammers would come through too. So it had to be all or nothing, and it was too much work for legitimate mass mailers. But it was a really interesting concept, and Satoshi borrowed that concept from that Adam Back proposed back in '97 for this. So here's the way it works: the the system is, so imagine that there are, among all these peers, there are people exchanging value. They're exchanging Bitcoins. A Bitcoin exchange is somebody wants to send somebody else some Bitcoinage. So they have the whole system works with a asymmetric key system, a public key system, where they have both a public key and a private key. They take some amount of Bitcoinage and put their public key, sort of associate their include their public key in the transaction, also the public key of the person it is being sent to, and then they sign it with their private key. So what that creates is that creates a transaction that only they could have originated, because they're the only ones who have their private key, which they keep secret. That transaction is broadcast into this peer-to-peer network to all the nodes in the network, and everyone's transactions are broadcast. Now, it's easy for anyone to verify that transaction because they know the public key of the signer, and that allows them to verify the signature. They can't sign it themselves, but they can verify the signature. So that allows them to verify the transaction. Now what we have to do is we need to prevent that the person who's just depleted their Bitcoinage by giving some away from giving the same Bitcoins away again. So that's clearly one of the hard things to solve about this. So the way we do this is, every so often, all of the transactions which have occurred since there's sort of a problem of chicken and egg here, because I have to explain multiple things at once for this thing to hang together. There's this notion of blocks. A block is a collection of transactions which have been sort of adopted by the network. The block, which is this collection of transactions, is the thing which work is done to create. In the same way that I was talking about work being done to create this special hash for email headers, the work being done to create this block is what all the nodes on the network are busy doing. So all the nodes receive transactions, and a block is chained to all the previous blocks by taking the hash of the previous block as part of the next block, which means that essentially you have a forward-moving chain of blocks which are linked by the hash of the previous block. There is a genesis, what's called the genesis block, which was created on January 3rd of 2009. So just a little over 2 years ago, when the system began, there was an anchor block which is embedded into the all of these nodes into the code in the nodes. When someone downloads the program and turns it on, they go to an IRC chat room. That is, the code autonomously goes to an IRC chat room, joins the room, and that's how it learns about all the other nodes, or many of the other nodes on the network. It then interconnects to them and receives the entire history of all previous blocks. That is, this blockchain anchored by the Genesis block all the way to the most recent block that anyone has created. So, and in
That sounds like it could become computationally extensive over time, though, right?
Yes, except that there's another clever thing that it turns out there's a way to compress these so that once the blocks are old enough and no one cares about the individual transaction details, then you no longer really need to care about them. The idea is you need the transaction details long enough to make sure that nobody so that the transaction details are available in the network so that no one is able to reissue the same Bitcoins again. But at some point, then it becomes impossible for them to, because the blocks become old enough, and you do not need to. It turns out you're able to compress these blocks and make them a lot smaller. So, and I think the growth rate is estimated at something like 4.2 megabytes per year would be the maximum amount of storage that this architecture requires. So it ends up really not being very much over time. So what happens is there's this sort of chain of blocks. Now, all the nodes in the network are competing with each other to create the next block. And it's the node which wins, the node which first does the amount of work required to essentially create the next block that earns 50 Bitcoins. And so, and this all sort of scales in the right way. I'll explain in a second. So all of the nodes are cranking away. They are taking all the transactions which have not yet been encased in a block, and they hash all of that along with the hash of the previous block, which that anchors them together and means that you're not able to create a block that isn't linked to the prior one. Hash it all together, and then there's a certain amount of difficulty, which is of finding a block that functions by exactly as we were talking, having a hash with some number of zeros from the left end going down. And at the moment, I think that number is 12 at this point in time. So all the nodes are tweaking a little fudge factor in the hash, trying to build a block which has 12 zeros at the leading part of this 256-bit SHA-256 hash. As soon as a node finds it, it declares success, broadcasts that to the network. Remember that while it's extremely difficult to find the pattern that makes the hash, it's incredibly easy to verify it. Verifying the hash just requires doing the hash of the block and seeing that, oh, look, somebody did create a block that's got all those zeros. And the first transaction in any block is paying yourself 50 Bitcoins. But if you can make that block valid, then that transaction in the block of paying yourself 50 Bitcoins is validated by the network.
We've actually had 2 blocks created since we started explaining what blocks are, by the way, for a little estimate of how there are people out there using this.
Yes. In fact, there's a site called, I think it's Block Track.
Block Explorer is the one that I'm at.
That's the one.
And that's where I'm keeping track of this.
Yep. Block Explorer allows you, it's a website that is participating in this peer-to-peer network, which allows you to go look at the history of all the blocks that have been created so far.
Now, is this a worry that all of your finances are now going to be in public? Can people look at this and figure out how much money you're spending and who you're giving it to?
Well, that's one of the other beauties, is that the the only thing which is known, this is a completely anonymous currency system. Like more anonymous than anything else. The only thing that is known is your public key. So when you download this software and fire it up on your machine and start it running, the first thing it does is to create a key pair. And so you will see, for example, if you find the EFF Bitcoin donation, they show their public key, and various other organizations that accept Bitcoin, they show their public key. So when you look at the history of transactions, all you're seeing is this random ASCII gibberish, which is the public key converted into ASCII, and people keep their private key private, but there's no way of knowing who is behind any public key. And the Bitcoin client will happily produce key pairs till the cows come home. You can make more key pairs anytime you want. So there's not even any way to track somebody by like, oh, look, there's the same guy who did a transaction here, he did it here. Only if you did not create another public key would that be the case, but you are free to create new, essentially the public key is a temporary, pure binary representation of you, which you're free to retire and create a new one anytime you want.
I just downloaded it and started it. It's not creating. It says I'm not connected. It's not creating anything. Is that because I'm not in idle time? It has to be idle to start generating those coins automatically?
Well, yes. And, okay, so many things have happened in the last 2 years. First of all, this began to get traction, and people began having fun with this. The way the system works is, and I need to get this right, is the coin creation rate is 300 coins per hour within the entire system. And your CPU speed, the ratio of your CPU speed over the total CPU speed within the entire Bitcoin network determines the probability that you will be able to solve the puzzle of creating one of these blocks. So it's estimated, for example, that at this point, I think it was December 2010, so about 2 months ago, there were enough nodes actively cranking away that it would take you about a year to generate 50 Bitcoins. That is, so you're not going to see it happen quickly. Now, what happened is, as these things started getting valuable, started becoming worth something, where you can actually trade if you happen to get lucky and your node solved the most recent block that everybody was working on before anybody else, you'd get 50 Bitcoins. Today, there is an exchange that will transfer that in US dollars, for example, into your PayPal account. So you actually can make money. Now, you can imagine then that people said, wait a minute, this seems like a good idea. Well, there's something that's much more powerful than even multi-core CPUs, and that's GPUs, graphics processing units. Now Google Bitcoin space miner, M-I-N-E-R, as in a gold miner. What's happened is that there are people on the net that have built Bitcoin creating boxes with as many graphics processing units as they can get, with fans cooling them. They're overclocked. They're pouring Freon over them. These things are running 24/7.
Like oil derricks.
So
they're drilling for Bitcoin.
They really are. They're literally creating Bitcoinage. Now, the cool thing is all of this was anticipated in the original system, because the immediate response to the Bitcoin network of the presence of massive Bitcoin computation power, which essentially allowed the people who had these machines to be printing money, minting Bitcoins with a much greater probability than, than somebody who just had a CPU running along. The system automatically changed the problem difficulty in order to stabilize the rate at which coins are coming into the system. And here's the deal. There will never, ever, ever be more than 21 million Bitcoins created. The way this works is that the difficulty of this problem that is being solved, that is this hashing problem where you're trying to find leading zeros in the hash, it's adjusted continuously by the network, so that in the first 4 years of the Bitcoin network, and we're 2 years in now, in the first 4 years, half of that total number of Bitcoins will be created. That is 10,500,000 Bitcoins will be created in the first 4 years. In the second 4 years, half again, that is only 5,250,000 in years 4 through 8. In years 8 through 12, that is the next 4 years, again that amount is halved. And so the rate of coinage creation will be decreasing exponentially, leveling off, so that in the far future, only 21 million will ever be created. So we have a controlled and known rate of inflation within the system. And it makes sense because initially, as the system is coming online, as goods and services are being made available and are trading within the system, you want to have more currency being pumped into the network so that you have Bitcoins to trade, but you don't want it to go forever. Now, the problem would be, of course, if we absolutely cap the total number of coinage at 21 million, then, and there comes, a much greater demand for this, the tendency is to want more. Well, the solution is that you're not forced to trade in integer amounts of Bitcoins. That is, the UI right now gives you 2 decimal digits of coinage. So you're able to create, for example, you could exchange 0.01 of a Bitcoin, but the technology supports 8 decimal digits, although right now we're only using 2. So that allows for deflation over time, because we're absolutely capping the total number of coinage at this 21 million mark. And we know that it's going to be declining over time, and it doesn't matter how much GPU power is put into the system adapts so that the problems being solved the difficulty scales up to balance the amount of processing power in the entire network. And some people have commented that the question then becomes, are you spending more money on electricity and cooling for these crazy Bitcoin generating engines than the money you produce? And over time, it looks like that will be the limiting factor. It's like, yay, I've created this insane work machine to create Bitcoins, but gee, my electric bill went up more than the money that I'm making.
And PG&E isn't taking Bitcoins yet for my rates.
So if there's also a cool site that I got a kick out of called the Bitcoin Faucet. The Bitcoin Faucet.
I was just trying to use that. The rate limit has been exceeded. I think everybody's going to get their Explain what it is, though.
It's just a fun way that somebody can get some free Bitcoins. People who have them can donate them to the site, and the guy thanks you very much. And as long as he's got enough supply, he'll give you some Bitcoins. At the moment, when I looked before the podcast, he was giving 0.05 Bitcoins per visitor. When his balance of available Bitcoins that he's able to distribute for free is high enough, he increases that. But if he falls below a certain mark, he decreases it in order to conserve his supply. There's an online buyer and seller escrow service so that two people are able to agree that they're each happy with the exchange of whatever it is they exchange, for example, in the real world, in order to allow a Bitcoin transaction to occur. There are a number of online exchanges where you're able to buy and sell Bitcoins. There's online charts where you can look at the rate at which Bitcoins are being bought and sold and their relative currencies. This is available in a huge number of currencies and a whole bunch of languages. And essentially it is extremely cool crypto, which, this has been pounded on and looked at, and it looks to me like the guy has solved the problems and has created a virtual currency that floats all by itself, that is completely private, that obviously you need somebody who's going to agree with you that you want to, exchange this coinage, but this thing exists and it's taking off. And I wanted our listeners to know about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's just very cool.
Really fascinating stuff. I've been playing with it while we've been talking, too. I have no balance, though, and I can't. The faucet is off right now, but at least I'm connected finally. So I hope
so it did. You did find your network.
Yeah, I finally found the network. I have no connections yet, though. But
one of the things they recommend, if our listeners want to play with this, is you will get much better connectivity if you do port forwarding of port 8333 from through your router, which typically most people have, or your firewall to the application.
Okay.
That way, other nodes that are informed about you are able to make incoming connections to you, and it's not just you making outgoing connections to them, and that'll allow you to participate in the network. But I would encourage our listeners to poke around as you have been, Tom. There are pictures of these people's GPU boxes that they've made with all these fans all over them, and discussions about the giga hashes per second in the network. I'm trying to think. I made some notes about it somewhere about the
the average rate of block creation.
186 gigahashes per second is the total network hashing strength. That is, there are 186 billion hash operations being performed within the entire network, trying to solve the problem of the next block creation. The one who does gets 50 Bitcoins. Oh, and that number also decreases over time, so that it's for the first 210,000 blocks, the value is 50 Bitcoins per block, that if your computer solves the puzzle before somebody else's. Then for the next 210 blocks, that's cut in half to 25 Bitcoins. Then for the next 210,000 blocks to 12.5 Bitcoins and to 6.25 Bitcoins and so forth on down. So this whole system is designed to scale correctly and basically create a secure, stable currency with real world value, which it has now. You can buy and sell Bitcoins. If you wanted to, you could take $100 and go buy some Bitcoins, and their electronic currency. You could then send those anonymously to someone else, and they could cash them in to their own currency or back into dollars or whatever they wanted. I mean, this exists now, and it looks like it's like bulletproof. And the PDF explains they've really thought through what bad guys can do. The only attack which is known on the system would involve somebody with massive computational power spoofing the chain, because it's this chain of blocks which provides the integrity for the system. But the longer the chain gets and the more good nodes there are, the more impossible it becomes for anyone with massive computational power to spoof the chain. So the other thing that has happened is there's this notion of pooling. Individuals have become a little disenchanted with the fact that, they've got their quad-core i7 cranking away 24/7. They haven't made any money yet. They like the idea of printing money. The fact is, over time, this is not going to be feasible. That is, the way to get rich is not to print money. It's like gold miners, like during the gold rush. You ran out and you hope to go strike it rich and find a vein of gold and make money. Over time, that just became less and less feasible because the ground had been picked over and there just wasn't gold to be found. Similarly, ultimately, this will be, it's when the coinage enters the currency and begins to flow, people will be using it as a store of value. But anyway, what I was saying was that people who have been disenchanted, they're joining pools of users where they'll all be working together on and pooling their CPU resources and then sharing the proceeds appropriately. So you may not get 50 Bitcoins, but you may get 2.5 because you are 2.5 out of 50th of the CPU resource in a pool that collectively solved a block. So it's a way for people to see some have some of the fun of creating coinage out of thin air by doing the work that makes the whole network go. And anyway, it is the work that has to be done, the difficulty of doing the work that keeps bad guys from being able to spoof the system, because there isn't any way to shortcut this hashing of the blocks. It's just brute force work, and as more good GPU based systems come online, that hugely raises the bar that bad guys would have to scale in order to spoof, because now, as a consequence of sort of this phenomenon of using GPUs to create Bitcoins, the network is scaled, so the rate of coin creation is still tracking exactly what it should, but the amount of processing time being required to make that happen has just gone through the roof.
There's Bitcoins in them thar internets.
Anyway, just really, really fascinating. And I mean, it works. We have a state-free, crypto-secure, anonymous, real currency now that exists.
Check it out at bitcoin.org. It's really fun to play around. .org, not .arg. .org. Yeah. There's no piracy in the Bitcoin world. Thank you, Steve, so much for explaining that. That was really fascinating. I can't wait to poke around with this a little more. I think I'm going to have to do the port forwarding that you were talking about to get it. Well, no, I've got one connection now. So it seems to be slowly. I guess that's what I'd say to new people. If you're looking at this, be patient. Give it some time to connect. You might try the port forwarding trick. What port was it again?
8333.
8333.
All this is documented in the FAQ at bitcoin.org. And the other thing that happens is when you connect, the first thing that happens is your node needs to download the history of prior blocks. So that'll take a while, but you'll see progress things and so forth. And there is on the UI, there is an option to say, start making Bitcoins.
Yeah. start making money. All right, folks, don't forget to visit grc.com. Steve's got some excellent products up there. Of course, we talked about SpinRite. I've used Shields Up over and over throughout my years since you created it to make sure that there's not any ports open that I don't want opened, and all that stuff. Also, it makes you feel really good when you are locked down, because you have this great, I don't remember exactly how you phrase it, but you have this like, that's impressive. I couldn't see a single port. So check it out, grc.com. Anything else you want to talk about before we head out of here, Steve?
I think we got it covered. We'll do a Q&A next week. So I encourage, as always, our listeners to swing by grc.com/feedback. And if you play with Bitcoin, you have questions, I'd love to hear them, and maybe we'll answer them next week.
For free. We won't charge any Bitcoins to answer.
No charge.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I'll be back one more week next week. Leo will be back in 2 weeks from his vacation. Thanks for watching Security Now. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tom.
Security Now.